Welcome to Wayne County Connection. I'm your host, Michael Swigert. Thanks for joining me again as we promote Wayne County as a great place to work, live, and play. As our regular viewers will recall, we do that by highlighting individuals and the agencies that they represent that are doing their part to make Wayne County a great place to work, live, and play. And then we encourage you to get connected with them to do your part as well, because it takes a community to make a community. I would like to remind you that as this program airs originally, we are starting at the end of May and through June. And because of that, we have some changes in our communities, and the big change is school's out, and that means the kids aren't just available in the morning and the afternoons, but all throughout the day, and they'll be out, and we ask that you be especially aware of kids as they're moving around the playground and enjoying our communities or moving back and forth between their homes and various other activities. And it's not too late for you to get your child involved in the many summer activities that are going on here in Wayne County. You can find out more about what's going on, not only summer programs for kids, but for activities that you can get involved with by visiting waynet.org/calendar. That's where you can find out more about what's being planned in our community. And if you have an event that you'd like to promote and sponsor, you can also submit that to the calendar. waynet.org is your source for all things local. Well, thanks for watching, and I'd like to start our show or kick our show off now by introducing our guest. Our guest today is Randy Baker, and he's the General Manager at Richmond Power and Light. Join me in welcoming you to the show. Randy, it's great to have you.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
As you might know by watching our show previously, that we like to start our program with connecting our guest with our viewers by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, no problem. I was actually born here in Richmond, Indiana. When I was quite young, we moved to Cincinnati for a while, but then I came back to Richmond, so that's my tie here. Did a lot of things before I came to Richmond Power and Light. I was in the IT business, did a lot of computer programming and things like that for various software companies and consulting, and that's what actually brought me to RP&L. In the late 90s, the entire country was looking at electricity deregulation. They didn't know at the time if their computer software systems could make the jump to a deregulated environment or not. And so I came on with a contract, and the big joke is I had a year contract, and that was in '99, and I guess the year's not up yet. But I did come on board in 2000 then as the IT manager, went to corporate services director, and then a few years ago became general manager.
And you have some other involvement in the community as well. People might recognize you, especially Channel 11 viewers from the RP&L board meetings, which are aired on WCTV or WGTV or Channel 11. But you have some other involvement in the community as well. You're a local musician. And
play a lot of music around here. I did that as a profession for a lot of years before I actually got into IT business and consulting and things like that. Play a lot with a young man around here called Sean Lamb. So we play a lot, travel some. I don't do so much road work anymore, but you know.
Well, that's kind of the way it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So RP&L, Richmond Power and Light, is the municipally owned electric utility.
Right.
And probably need to talk about that a little bit there. So first of all, everybody knows, in at least RP&L, but they may not know the history and how exactly it interacts with our community other than just being an electric provider. So let's talk a little bit about the history, very briefly, of RP&L, and then where we sit now.
Well, sure. Well, the RP&L actually started in 1901, and at the time, people may or may not know, there were actually two electric companies here in town. One was privately owned, and one was municipal. People voted in Richmond to buy out the privately owned, and that's how we started as a municipal electric company.
Okay. And that's kind of a unique situation even then and today that the municipality owned it, because as you mentioned, private power providers were kind of the dominant force, and even today they're not a lot of municipally owned.
Around the state, there are 60 other municipals that we're directly tied with through IMPA, which is our wholesale electric provider.
Okay.
As you know, we generated for a long time as well.
Right.
And still do a little bit. That generation plant was built in 1954. There was another one before that that sits almost down where the Veterans Park is now. That was the original RP&L there.
Yeah.
And in 1954, the generation plant we have now was built. It was built to be a 50-year plant.
Okay.
So, but it's still going and doesn't do baseline anymore, but peaking. It runs about 20 or 30 days a year. And it's actually, we still own it, but it's managed by IMPA.
Okay. And that was something that happened a few years ago, and that RP&L was a part of this IMPA, which stands for
Indiana Municipal Power Agency.
Okay, so and that's it's really an oversight committee that kind of coordinates the activities of multiple power generators, or
Doesn't coordinate the activities as much as they are a wholesale distributor.
okay,
So we're connected with them with 61 communities total, 1 in Ohio and 60, including us, in Indiana. So it kind of works like a co-op a little bit. So the agency goes out and buys power, generates power for all 61 communities. So it keeps the price down. So we 330,000 customers total. So we can buy and generate in that kind of volume.
so there's kind of an economies of scale
Yes.
factor that comes into play there, rather than
Right.
just the generating plant on 27 South trying to produce energy for the local customers. You have a tie-in with other communities nearby and other generation plants nearby that supply each other. And as you mentioned, the generation at the South 27 plant is diminished to like 30 days a year right now.
Yeah, it used to, until about 2004, it was called what we call baseline, which meant it ran 24/7. At that point, we switched over to what's called peaker. So when the demand is out there, then the plant operates.
Especially during the summer months that we're coming into now with increased AC usage and other
Any of
cooling.
the extremes, right?
Right.
Heat or cold.
Okay. So there's a couple of things that come to mind right now, and the first question is, with not being a local power generator, how does that really affect the community, the local community? That's the first question. The second question is then, how big is RP&L's reach? Is it just city residents in Richmond, or do you go outside of the city a little bit as well?
Well, in terms of the city, we're just basically in the city and a 2-mile fringe around the city.
Okay.
So that's basically our service area.
All right. And then with that 2-mile fringe, we include some of the county residents and so forth as well. But that kind of goes back to, since you're not just a local power generator, how does that benefit the Wayne County residents the most, and Richmond City residents, as opposed to being a local power generator?
Well, I'm not sure. We do just distribution here in the city, so we buy our power, all of it, have since 1982. Even the power that was generated at our plant was sold to IMPA and went out on the general market.
Okay.
And that's how that was set up at that time.
Okay.
In terms of advantages to our customers here in town, we've got a local customer touch to the whole thing. No one around us actually beats our response times on outages. So our guys do really well on that. So that's one of the strong points as well. We do keep the costs down by being in that. And the other part of being in that whole conglomerate of other communities, we've moved, when I started it was 99% coal. Now we're down to about 68% coal, with the others being some natural gas and some renewables coming on, solar, wind, biomass, and a little bit of nuclear.
Okay.
So by being a part of that larger community, we bring that to scale as well.
All right. And you just mentioned two different conditions that have been in the news recently here locally. One is coal, or coal ash, that was in the news recently, and the other thing is the solar panel fields. So let's take some time and talk about those. Let's talk about the coal ash first, because that was, I think, the bigger news recently, and I'm sure that a lot of people went, oh, you know, what's this all about? So
well, we went, oh, as well too. Well, it's not that anybody did anything wrong, but the way it was done, and this problem is not unique to us.
Right.
It's across the country, every place that's generated with coal over the years.
And that was the primary source.
That was the primary
burning
source,
coal into
yeah,
generators.
especially in the Midwest.
Right.
So you look back enough years, it was basically either natural gas or coal. And some places in the deep south, like in Florida, they actually used oil and some of those technologies. But anyway, for the coal in our part, when you burn coal, you end up with coal ash. So that was stored and put out behind our plant in about a 7.5, 8 acre plot of ground out there from 1954 till about 1970. So we've got approximately 400,000 tons of coal ash back there. In 2015, the EPA came out with a regulation that says you have to remediate that at some level. So that's what we're in the process of doing now. So it's kind of regulated as kind of like a landfill. But back in that day, there was no things like liners and things like that that we use now in landfills. So it just sits on the ground. So we are in the process of remediating that. There's 3 ways to do it. One is a cap, just cap it over where it's at so no water gets down in it and things like that. The more expensive option, and the option we hope to do at some point, is actually remove it out and put it in a cell in a landfill someplace. The third option is we're examining this, but we don't know if it's going to work or not. They do use coal ash as a byproduct in cement products.
Okay.
So if your coal ash is good enough and it doesn't have, I don't want to get too far off in technicalities here, but doesn't have too much bottom ash in it and things like that, it can be sold.
Okay.
And remediated. So we're looking at all 3 of those scenarios now.
Right. And again, as you mentioned, the situation as it exists was not created by wrongdoing. It was just the standard practice. You put the coal ash out, you had to take it out of the furnaces and put it somewhere, and just right on your property was the easiest place to do it. And at the time, there weren't concerns about the way the ash leached into the soil or the byproduct as far as rainfall on it, and that kind of leaching this stuff out into the soil and then moving it out, it just wasn't considered. But later in time, that is considered, and now we're trying to protect our other resources.
That's correct.
By dealing with that resource appropriately.
Yeah, as part of the project, we've installed about 14, I believe, ground watering wells directly around the perimeter of that coal ash impoundment area, just to make sure that none of it actually is getting into the water tables.
So there are already steps that are being taken in addition to the bigger remediation steps, the 3 options that you talked about just a minute ago.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And the best case scenario, the one that you're considering the strongest, is a balance of the cost and the benefit to RP&L and to our local community, right?
That's right. Because we're a nonprofit, so whatever it costs us to get power to your home or business, that's what we charge. We don't have shareholders in that. That's what makes our prices a little bit cheaper than many of the IOUs that are around us. And that's how we operate. So anything costs we get like that, eventually come back down to the consumer. Which is one of those things that, as a consumer, about the only times that I really think about RP&L are when I have to pay my bill or when there's an outage. And the rest of the time it's like, oh yeah, they're over there doing whatever. That's correct. However, getting back to one of the other things, one of the ways that I've been more aware of RP&L have been the increased presence of solar panels in our community. And that's been a big project of RP&L. And there are some solar panel farms in our community. And let's talk a little bit about how that came to be and how that's impacting power production here for local residents. Okay, again, trying to move away from coal and into some more of the renewables. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier or not, the state as a whole has moved up about 70–75% away from coal, or 25%. We're about the mix is about 75 coal. We're actually, through our partnership with IMPA, below that, about 68–69%. So we're actually beating the state average in terms of renewables. Great. So, and these solar parks are part of that venture. IMPA started partnering with us to install those a few years ago. So we've got what we call a 1 meg solar park, actually directly next to RP&L. And the new one that people have been looking at is on the old New Creations property. Right. That's about, I think, 7 or 8 meg total. Okay. and by the way, to give you a size of the scope of the renewable problem, our total load here in town is about 150 meg.
Okay.
So you can see how much of a dent that makes.
All right. So,
And there's 2 more projects planned beyond this. One starting this in June, and which will be directly across from the new creations on the other side of the road.
okay.
And now they have bought land out close to the industrial park along 70 out there, so it'll be another plant going in out there as well.
All right.
I think in total, when we get everything done, we may be able to approach 20-25% of our load with renewables here in town.
That's kind of a big number
it
to
is.
wrap your head around. We see these farms, and that was, you answered part of the question that comes up with how much power is actually generated by these. The solar panels at the city building that are sitting out there, one of the questions that somebody asked me recently was, well, is that just for show? You know, or is it actually doing anything to provide energy at all? And then that extends to these solar farms or solar parks, as you mentioned.
That panel in front of the city building is one panel, so it does produce energy. It is tied to the grid. There's an inverter inside the building that actually puts that on the grid, but it's a pretty small amount compared to, and plus, since that was put in, and even now, which is what, I don't know, 10 years or so, technology has vastly improved since then as well.
So these solar parks that are going in, you said right now it's about 8 megs total between the one at
Something
the
like that,
RP&L
yeah.
and stuff. So it's 8 megs out of, you said, about 150 for our total consumption right now. And you're talking about the additional expansion on the west side of 70 across from the New Creations Park right now, and then again on the west side of the county over by the industrial park. And those are going to add more power. You said a total of about 25% eventually.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get up to that amount, right?
Okay. And
you kind of compare that to, we get calls every week about people that want to put panels on their house and things like that. So a couple of those fields are the, you know, if you measure it out, 2, 4, 6,000 homes total. So you think about it in that respect, a lot of, look at it kind of more as a community solar project. And
yeah, that was the next part of the question there was, okay, so we can talk about raw numbers and percentages of power generation, but how does that affect the home user, you know? Because the question that comes to mind is how much power that's generated by RP&L goes to residential versus commercial enterprises or even you know, government enterprises or municipal enterprise. For example, you know, you think of streetlights and other power that is not used by specific entities but is community power, as it were.
The big power users in Richmond and other communities like ours are actually the industrial users. So it's all the factories where we do the jobs.
Right.
So that's 60% of our load goes out to industrial and commercial.
So if we could get 25% of the power being generated by renewables, that still wouldn't cover even all of the residential needs.
Again,
but it's a big dent.
Yeah, it's looking at the scope of that whole problem because we get calls all the time that, why don't you just switch over to solar panels?
Yeah, because it's that easy, right? Doesn't take any planning, doesn't take any...
I kind of make the comparison when they come out and tour our facility. Our coal plant sits on about 6 or 7 acres.
Right.
So it generates 100 meg. So I've got 7.5 acres for 1 meg of solar.
Yeah.
So you start to get a picture of what it takes to actually get to that point. And then, of course, if the sun's not out, solar doesn't generate.
So as far as a consumer, and we didn't actually talk about this before the program, so I may be hitting you kind of sideways here, but if I was a residential user or even a commercial user and I was wanting to consider adding solar either to new construction or to existing construction, would there be a way that I could get tips and help from RP&L as far as what products to get and how that best ties and what that's going to do to my grid, and is there going to be a chargeback for me having my own power or whatever?
We encourage anybody that wants to do their own solar projects to get with us because there's a safety factor. It needs to be hooked to the grid properly. And even to get your insurance to cover it, it needs to be connected properly. So we do encourage people to do that. But people can do anything they want behind their own meter. So, and in fact, if you put solar panels out, and we have one church doing it here in town, solar panels out, and you generate more than you use, IMPA will actually buy that at a wholesale rate from you.
Okay. So there's a way not only to make a better impact on the environment, but you can affect your community in a positive way as well.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And people can find more information about that as we're in the last third of our program now. People want more information. What are the ways that our viewers can get in contact with RP&L for more information?
Well, our phone number is 973-7200, and just in the menu of options, just find who you want to talk to in terms of that. But we'll actually send out our engineering department to look at your operation or even your home. We do have a couple of homes around here that have solar panels and things like that. Facebook's a good one, and then our website has places where you can ask questions and respond in there as well.
And the website also has the option to look at your usage and to pay your bill online and so forth if people aren't signed up for that yet.
We added that option in 2003. So since 2003, we've been able to take online payments.
We're coming now down to just 5 minutes of our program or less, and there are a couple of things I wanted to touch on. One thing that I learned from your Facebook page, actually, which, by the way, the Facebook page is a great place for you to get information about outages. RP&L is great about posting, there's an outage here, and now the outage has been relieved. So that's a great place, which might be difficult if the power's out for you. You might have to consider different ways to get that information. But there are also a couple of things. There were some recent articles of RP&L's involvement with schools and programs that you have with the schools. And then also, really we'll touch on this very briefly, is the lineman rodeo. So let's first of all talk about the school interactions with RP&L.
Okay, yeah, we do try to reach out to the schools in the area and help kids, and we award some things based on academics and attendance and things like that. And we just try to be, a partner in the community with the schools.
So it's not just electrical safety that you do when you go in. There are some other things beyond that you interact with the kids on. And
when I go out to the schools, I look at the kids and think these could be future RP&L employees. We've got linemen and substation people, billing people. We've got engineers, and a whole list of management then. So.
Right, so a broad spectrum of opportunities available, and the lineman, that's the kind of the peak job as far as direct working with electricity, of a career path thing there. But one of the things that they do these lineman rodeos, which are basically competitions between the electricians that work for RP&L and those that work for other agencies, statewide and nationally. That's
correct. We're part of APPA, which is the American Public Power Association. So that's public power across the country. And we do have these lineman competitions where they'll get out and they'll have different things that they do in the field anyway. Climb poles, change out gear, and things like that, handle emergencies, and they are competition, competitive events. And everybody loves doing them, or our linemen love doing them.
Sure.
So it's good for morale, for one thing. But also, you learn, in the process, you learn how other utilities across the country do things maybe differently than us, and how they handle their safety factors and things like that. Those lineman jobs, it takes almost 5 years. It's like a college education to get from an apprentice lineman to a journeyman, which is the top where you can do everything out there. So it's quite a long process, and the rodeos aid in that and help in that.
And they not only show off the skills and talents of the men and women that are doing the job. But as you mentioned, they also talk about safety practices, because it's one thing to be able to get up a pole quickly.
Right.
It's another thing to be able to come down safely.
Yeah, when the judges score on that, that's part of their scoring system.
Right.
Are you doing that job like it's supposed to be done?
And then that kind of fun side of it, the competition and so forth, directly impacts the performance of the linemen when they're actually faced with an outage somewhere or an emergency, a line down, a tree on a line, a transformer blows,
Right.
et cetera. And they're prepared for that. So I just mentioned a whole bunch of conditions that might cause power outages, and we're coming to the end of our show. Randy Baker, General Manager of RP&L, thank you for coming on our show
Well,
today
thank you.
and for talking with us about RP&L.
No problem.
Thank you for watching. There's so much more to know about Richmond Power and Light and the way that it provides power to our community and the way that the employees benefit you on a regular basis. I'd like to encourage you to contact RP&L. You'll find links on our website at waynet.org/cc, and you will also find it from Facebook. Just search RP&L, and their website is rp-l.com. We thank you for watching. Encourage you to do your part to get involved to make Wayne County a great place to work, live, and play. I'm your host, Michael Swigert. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next month.